This video is going to focus on one of our economic concepts, which is called interdependence. Now, interdependence is the fact that different parts of our economy are mutually reliant on each other. What does that mean? Well, that means that groups in our economy rely on other groups in order to satisfy our needs and wants. And that's a concept that we've looked at earlier in the course. So when we talk about groups in our economy, there are two groups that we're going to focus on specifically. First is consumers, and the second is producers. So what do these terms actually mean? Well, a consumer is anyone who buys or uses goods and services. Someone who buys or uses goods and services. Now, I'm sure at some point, all of us have been a consumer. Maybe we've bought something for ourselves, or I'm sure we've certainly used a good or service in our life at some point. So all of us are consumers, and there are many consumers in an economy. The other group we're going to look at is producers. A producer is an individual or an organization that actually creates or provides goods and services. Now, these two groups in our economy, consumers and producers, they are mutually reliant on each other. Another way we can say that is that they have interdependence. They depend on each other for goods and services and for money as well. So in order to understand the connection between these two groups, we look at what's called economic flows. Economic flows. The two flows that we're going to focus on are the money flow. Now, the money flow is what we spend to buy goods and services, but also what we earn in terms of income for our labor, which is the work that we do. The other type of flow is called the real flow. Now, the real flow are actually the goods and services that we produce and also the labor itself used to make goods and services. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to put all of these concepts together. We're going to look at our first economic model. An economic model is an oversimplification of what happens in the real world. So what we do is we take what happens in the real world and we try to understand it by simplifying what happens. We're going to take our two groups and we're going to show how consumers and producers are actually mutually reliant or interdependent on each other. And the way that we're going to do that is by looking at the economic flows between them. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at how goods and services are made by producers and are then given to consumers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a little arrow here, and I'm going to label this arrow goods and services. we know that goods and services are made by producers and then they travel from producers all the way to consumers. Now, in exchange for those goods and services, what do consumers have to do? Well, yeah, they have to pay for those goods and services. So I'm going to draw a little arrow going from consumers all the way over to producers, and I'm going to label this expenditure. Now, this is a fancy word, expenditure. Expenditure is a fancy word for spending money. So we have our first big exchange. The goods and services that are made by producers are exchanged for expenditure by consumers. Now, there's another exchange that happens in our model. We have consumers actually providing their labor to producers. So I'm going to have a little arrow going this way. And we can see here that consumers will provide producers with their labor. Now, what do we mean by labor? We mean the jobs that people do to create a good or a service. So my labor and the labor of the teachers in your classroom is to actually provide the service of education for a producer and pass it on to our students. Another type of labor might be farmers working in agriculture. Their labor is to actually produce these primary products like food, like wheat, like barley, and then to actually produce that for consumers as well. So labor is essentially work. In return for labor, producers provide consumers with something. Now, no one, does anything for free nowadays. In exchange for labor, consumers earn an income. And that is our circular flow of income. I'm going to return to the two economic flows that we discussed earlier, and we can see how our economic flows are actually connected to each other. The first flow we'll look at is the money flow. So we can see that income earned by consumers oh, my spelling, good Lord. Income earned by consumers is then spent on goods and services. Goods and services. And that's how producers will make their money in order to pay consumers. So that's why it's called the circular flow, because this will just go around and around and around constantly in our economy. The other flow we had was the real flow, where consumers provide labor. Labor is provided to producers to create goods and services. And again, because this is circular, again and again will go around, and all the labor that gets provided will be turned into goods and services. And that is a really simple way of showing how our economy works.